Hello, and welcome to the 30-minute download community audit report. My name is Dr. Dorsey Applyrs, and I am the Chief City Auditor in the City of Albany. The purpose of the 30-minute download is to provide an accessible platform for the Albany community to hear from city leaders about programs and services. This platform is designed to break down barriers between the government and our constituencies and to promote transparency. Each segment will highlight some of the issues and concerns raised by residents, business leaders, as well as community leaders. During this segment, we will be discussing the state of housing in the city of Albany. Joining me today is Pamela Howard, Executive Director of the Historic Albany Foundation, and Samuel Wells, Neighborhood Stabilization Director for the City of Albany, Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So what I'm going to do is jump into a series of questions, and feel free to chime in and take the questions as you feel comfortable. So the first question is, how would you describe Albany's current housing stock and housing market?
Who would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can start. From Historic Albany Foundation, we are a preservation advocacy organization. So we're very concerned always with our current housing stock and what's happening. Currently in the city of Albany, we have about 70% of our housing built before the 1930s. So that's a pretty aging housing stock here, as well as a lot of, one of the things also that we're very concerned about is always vacant buildings. We have over 900 vacant buildings, and a lot of those are in our most, economically challenged and neighborhoods. So those are some of the things that we pay attention to the most here, and going back to those neighborhoods and sort of cycles and generations of poverty and neglect and some of those issues that we're still dealing with today.
Yeah, I'd agree with Pam there. It's, a lot of our housing stock is old and in need of repairs, some significant repairs. And for folks looking for housing, whether you're a wannabe home buyer or a renter, it's also a really tight market too. There aren't too many homes available for purchase for wannabe home buyers at the moment. And then for folks who are renters looking for an apartment right now is really challenging prospect. There aren't too many available apartments, and the apartments that are out there, can vary in price and condition. So it's a challenging housing market for folks right now.
Thank you both. How has this market shifted over the last 5 years?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now too is very high pricing. I mean, I was just looking at a house that I sold in Center Square a few years ago, and it just sold again, and it increased by $100,000. That to me was crazy. Well, my first thought was I should have stayed there. But between currently the housing prices and the interest rates, those two things, and that's not just an Albany issue, but those two things are really pushing people so that they can't buy houses right now. If you've got student loan debt, other debt, coming up with a down payment and paying 7% on a very expensive house, that sort of American dream mentality really isn't attainable for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, it's combined with the pandemic, rising costs have taken a toll, with inflation, but also, the rehabs that are needed to be done out there. We're looking at whether it's our community development agency, Habitat for Humanity, the Housing Authority, the Land Bank, everybody we talk to, if you have, gut rehabs right now are costing $200 a square foot, and that's if you get good pricing. Oftentimes it's more expensive than that. I was looking at some stats today, just 8 years ago, those prices were closer to $120, $150 a square foot. So it's a significant cost increase for rehabbing homes, regardless whether they're occupied or vacant, which makes things tough. So, you know, the market has shifted in a way that's tightened up and made it more difficult, I think, for everybody across the board. That and you know, there was a lot less movement, you know, from folks who had existing housing too, right? There's a lot of homes. There's some homes that are locked up right now, and when I say that, I mean, you know, there are folks who maybe have too much house, so to speak, right? They're aging in place. They want something smaller, something a bit more accessible. There isn't much out there right now that meets that demand. And so those folks are stuck in the housing they currently have, which may be too much, which again is one less house that a first-time home buyer with you know, a young family, a growing family can buy right now. So it can be very tough.
And Sam, you mentioned we have there's a limited housing stock. And then also at the same time, we have a lot of vacant homes that need a significant amount of repair. So for someone thinking, is it really limited when we have so much blight and available housing stock from a vacant housing perspective? How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, so to really clear up the picture there, you know, we have, I think as of the end of Q2, so about June 2023, we're you know, working on the more recent numbers, but as of like June 2023, and we had about 920 vacant buildings. Not all 920 vacant buildings are available for purchase. Many of them, actually the majority of them, are owned by private owners. You know, our public entities such as state, federal, local governments, land bank own a very small percentage of those properties, which is contrary to common public perception. You know, not all of those properties are currently available. There's a number of them that are sort of locked out of the market for various legal reasons, mostly. The ones that are available, most of them need a lot of rehab and repair right now. For someone looking at buying one of those and repairing it, you know, you're really going to want to make sure you have the money on hand, or have access to capital in a way that lets you perform that work. You know, that can be difficult depending on the project and the needs there. We always suggest, you know, making sure you get an accurate scope of work so you know how much money the building needs in repairs before you purchase it. And then when you purchase it, or as you're going through that process, you have a plan to get the money needed to fix that up if you don't have that capital on hand. So it's, you know, we want to make sure folks aren't going in with $1 and a dream, as much as I want to encourage folks to buy and rehab vacant properties. You know, make sure you have a fully thought out, fully vetted plan going into the purchasing process if your home needs a lot of work. If you're one of the lucky ones who have found a home and it doesn't need too much work, you know, there's a little less work you need to do on your end, but I'm sure you're paying a higher price up front for that. So,
Yeah, just to add to what Sam said, a lot of people don't understand that, you know, you might be able to buy a home from the land bank for $10,000, but there's no traditional funding that's going to give you a mortgage to be able to do that work. So you're going to have to either have the money or go, you know, even sweat equity is only going to get you so far when you need to hire architects and engineers to help you and licensed contractors. You know, your own know-how is only going to take you so far. And that's a difficult road where we have housing stock that's available, but unable to be purchased because the funding isn't there to do it.
Mhm. Thank you both for that. Can you just define affordability? Oftentimes, people talk about affordable housing and the need for affordable housing, but it's talked about in a very abstract way. So can you share, and I'll toss this to you first, Sam, um, from your context, when we're talking about affordability and affordable housing, can you clarify that, please?
yeah, so the common definition, the one that the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development uses, is that affordability is defined as you know, something as housing is considered affordable if it only eats up 30% or less of your income on a monthly or yearly basis. So whatever your income is, divide that essentially in three, and then a third of that is what, the federal government says you should be spending on your housing. Now, as we all know, not everybody, pays 30%. Some people pay less. A lot of people pay more because of the conditions that we see not only in Albany but across New York State and the country right now. But generally that's the commonly used definition of affordability.
Thank you. So this whole notion of um, workforce housing, how does that fit in with the affordability conversation?
Yeah, so workforce housing, and again, it all depends on the numbers you're using. You'll see a lot of developers and folks sometimes talk about use a metric called area median income. It's essentially if you take all the incomes in the defined census area and you take the exact middle, that's the median income. Not doesn't necessarily mean the average income, though those two are somewhat close to each other depending on the numbers you're using. A lot of developers and folks sometimes use the county area median income, and again, the area median income is much bigger than what we see in the city. And with folks' incomes, when you compare them when you compare folks in the city to outside of the city, those incomes are going to vary widely. So when we're really talking about workforce housing, we're talking roughly 60 to 100% of area median income. Sometimes even lower, you'll see 40%, 40 to 60% used more as workforce, blue collar, in affordability levels.
Thank you for that. Pam, would you care to add anything to the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think aside from the official definition of affordable housing, I mean, everybody should be able to live somewhere that is safe and affordable. It's just a human right to be able to have shelter that you can afford, and it is a safe place to live.
And if I can make it even clearer, the area median income, typically folks are looking, again, depends on exactly what your geographic range is, but we're talking $40,000 to $50,000 for City of Albany residents.
Thank you both for that. Yeah, housing is such a hot topic in the city of Albany, but everywhere at the moment. And oftentimes there's this tension when it comes to affordable housing and development. And I think it's always important to level set and get clear on when we talk about affordable housing, what we are actually talking about. So I thank you both for that clarification. So we talked about trends over the last 5 years, but as we look ahead, and right now, given the challenging market that we are in, what do you anticipate for our housing market over the course of the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I'll start on the home ownership side. And that's a great question. It really depends on availability and interest rates. Right now, if you're talking to a bank, your interest rate for your mortgage or any kind of loan product right now is typically 6-7%. That's pretty high, and higher than most potential home buyers want to purchase that. It seems like reading the national landscape, we'll see interest rates probably drop down to the 4 or 5% range in the next year or so. What's sort of up for debate is what happens after that. There are some realtors and economists who expect when the interest rates drop down to 4 and 5%, wannabe homeowners flooding back into the market, purchasing properties at that price, sending those rates back up. So we'll see exactly what happens there. But for wannabe home buyers and home ownership, there's not much availability, and the interest rates are sort of putting a strangle on home buying at the moment. For renters, it's a tight market out there. There isn't much availability. There's a lot of competition for units. The property at 25 Delaware Avenue is right across the street from the Price Chopper. right? There were 50 units, 50-ish units there. Conifer did a lottery for those units, and they, if I remember correctly, had hundreds of people applying for just 50 units, right? A lot of demand for those units. They're building another 180 units over on Northern Boulevard at the former Red Carpet Inn, which they have plans to demolish and turn into new affordable housing over there. But even if you add those units to what they built on Delaware Avenue, it's still not going to meet all the initial applicants that applied for the 25 Delaware Avenue project in the first place. So, obviously there's a market there, and developers are interested in filling the demand. The interesting part begins with how are developers doing it and how are they financing it. For affordable housing projects, there is financing available for developers. There is interest in meeting that demand. We're seeing a lot of that right now in 2023. I think our planning department, our planning board approved, and there's about 600 or so below market or affordable apartments in the pipeline coming on. What's really struggling right now is market rate housing. And those are, apartments meant for folks making a little bit more than the area median income. Those developers are they're scattering to the suburbs a little bit at the moment. There are still some developments in that range happening in the city of Albany, but it's fewer in 2023 than it was in previous years. So it's something to watch as time goes on and into the new year.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, when we think about our teachers, our firefighters, where do they fall in terms of some of the projects that you just mentioned? Do they, in terms of their salary, would they qualify for some of the housing that you just spoke about?
Yeah, so for example, the housing on Northern Boulevard, the incomes there to meet it's considered an affordable housing project, but they have a wide variety of incomes that are that they'll be renting units to that range from as little as $30,000 to $80,000. So that includes almost all teachers in the Albany City School District, for green tech, for any of our charter schools. It includes a lot of our firefighters and police officers, civil servants and employees, a lot of the folks in my building at 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard, the majority of the staff in buildings and codes, community development, planning, and neighborhood services all would be eligible for that housing. Those are low-income housing tax credit projects. And so that encompasses a lot of your blue collar, workforce style housing is included in those projects. A lot of folks can qualify for those. The affordable and below market housing projects we see, they struggle in meeting demand for folks making below 30,000. The folks really earning low incomes is a struggle to meet that housing need. And our housing authority, right, there's a waiting list for units and Section 8 vouchers for the housing authority right now. So for folks at the very bottom of the income brackets, it's an especially tough market out there for them right now.
Thank you. And so Pam, what do you think? Are we experiencing a housing crisis?
Not sure if it's a housing crisis. I mean, Sam and I have talked about this before. It's, I think you've got a perfect storm of a lot of different things going on. Being on the cusp of a national election again, it's really hard to project. It's going to be one party or the other that comes in. Interest rates may raise, they may go down. Housing prices don't tend to go back down right away. So we sort of have this perfect storm of unaffordability for homeowners. And that's a really tough spot to be in because it's not something that gets fixed overnight. It's not something that even can get fixed necessarily on a local level. So it's really a difficult situation to be in right now, and not just for Albany. Some of the other things that we talk about too is when we look at our vacant housing stock, and the demolitions always tend to make the news. But when you take a property and you back that up to what happened to make that property vacant. You're really looking at human service issues because somebody lost their job, somebody got divorced, somebody passed away. There were, repairs that couldn't be made, and because someone couldn't afford it, and they had to leave that property. So I think one of the things that we need to really start to take a look at too is prevention. Demolitions are a symptom and an outcome, but if we back that up and try to help people stay in their houses, if somebody needs $2,500 to fix their roof to be able to stay in that house and make it safe, that's a much smaller bill than a $50,000 to $75,000 demo bill. So backing it up and what can we do as a community to help people stay in their homes would solve a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I agree with everything Pam said. I would go a little further. I think we are experiencing a housing crisis, certainly statewide, if not locally. There just isn't enough housing to go around, and that's particularly true for certain types of housing, such as affordable housing, senior housing, supportive, housing with supportive services as well. Some of those sub-markets are really struggling with lack of units.
And aside from the economics of it, we also have an aging population. As Sam kind of alluded to, we have people who may not want to live in a big house anymore. And they may be folks who may be looking to get into a condo, get into an apartment, so they don't have to take care of a yard and take care of a whole house anymore. So you also have that segment of the population who's looking for a change, and there's not a lot out there. If you're not interested in going to senior housing yet, you still want to live on your own, you want your own apartment, there's not a lot of options for those folks either.
Yeah, I'll jump on my soapbox for a quick minute and tell a personal story. I bought my house in North Albany about two and a half years ago. And when my wife and I were looking at homes across the city, there was one in Pine Hills that was really interesting to us. It had a very large detached garage that was big enough theoretically to be a living space. And, my mother owns her home in Albany South End. She's not going to be there forever. It's one of those homes that may be too much home for her in the future, especially with the stairs in the property, and it'll still be a while before she has to think about leaving that home. She's still got a minute or two in there for sure. But when I was looking at this house in Pine Hills, I was thinking to myself, man, if I could convert this rear garage into a mother-in-law space, a mother-in-law apartment, an accessory dwelling unit, as they're called in the profession, that would be great. But that's something that's currently illegal in the city of Albany. We haven't legalized accessory dwelling units, the granny law suites, et cetera, which would be a nice little way for families to stay together, stay on the same property, and be able to have that in-home childcare ready for young families who are struggling to pay childcare costs, and freeing up some homes for other families who are looking for them. So that's sort of my personal story on my home buying process. We obviously didn't go forward with that Pine Hills home, partly because we aren't legally able to turn that garage into living space at the moment. But it's one of the many solutions, and they're not all big solutions. Some are rather small that we can utilize to help ease some of the burdens in housing right now.
Thank you both, and thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great example of an issue that with the right legislation could be resolved. You all have alluded to some of the challenges with our existing housing stock, aging homes, etc. Are there any other challenges that you would like to highlight when it comes to our housing stock?
Yeah, I think for new housing developments, if you attend planning board meetings, you often see a lot of opposition, from neighbors and from neighborhood residents to some of our our proposed affordable housing projects or supportive housing projects. And I'd like to encourage people to try to support more of those projects. We need more housing, and I'd rather see that housing be built here in the city of Albany than in a greenfield out in the hinterlands or the suburbs. Here we have more, we are closer to supportive services. We are closer to public transportation. It's environmentally friendly to built in already developed areas. To me, that's why I liked seeing the Northern Boulevard project get built. It was a vacant, underutilized site that was problematic before when it was a hotel. Repurposing that site for affordable housing is exactly what I'd love to see more of. I'd love to see more neighbors come out in support of those projects.
Thank you for that. And why would you say that? What are some of the reasons why neighbors have not been in support of some of these projects?
Well, I think there's a combination. There's some, fear of change and taller buildings and density, but there's also some mistrust of developers that historically, has been earned certainly by some developers, and some developers could certainly improve upon their presentation skills and how much information they share. That's certainly a given too. But I do think that there's like for the Northern Boulevard project, there was a lot of misinformation spreading around one of the nearby neighborhoods about the types of people living in that apartment complex. And as I mentioned, the folks eligible for that could be working at Samaritan Hospital across the street, could be employed by the school district or by the city of Albany. They're earning, those are the incomes that affordable housing project is targeting. Those are wonderful folks. Those are our neighbors, people who already serve us for the school district or the city. I would love to see more housing for those folks. And I think there's some misinformation and fear spreading around that.
Thank you for that. Pam, would you care to add anything?
Sure, I think housing also is a first line of defense in increasing the tax rolls. If you have more housing and you have more vacant buildings back online and occupied, it's good for everybody if we're all sharing the tax burden.
Yeah, I'd also like to add too, it's very much a regional issue. The city of Albany should not be solely responsible for providing all the affordable housing in the region or all the housing in the region. I think we've got almost nearly 1,000, right? 600 plus affordable housing units in the pipeline currently under development. That is multitudes higher than what some of our surrounding suburbs are producing. The town of Bethlehem had an affordable housing project that took 7 years just to get approved. It's not even constructed yet. 7 years ago, the developers first proposed it, and it just finally got approved. And it's the only affordable housing project that I think the town of Bethlehem that I'm aware of that they've produced at all. Right? It's very much a regional issue, and I think the city of Albany is pulling more than its fair share of producing affordable and supportive housing. And I think, the city of Albany should be recognized and commended for that, because we are certainly carrying the burden of that for the entire region in many ways.
Yeah, I think there's some old thinking of, the old not in my backyard that goes along with some of these projects, unfortunately.
Agreed. And you all have given some solutions. We've definitely talked about some of the challenges, and there have been some solutions offered, ideas for legislation. Are there any final comments that you all would like to provide as it relates to solutions to the housing challenges that we're facing, or just in general, for our viewers who are really interested in this topic, some final thoughts that you would like to share with them?
Yeah, I'll go first if that's okay, Pam. We've got a lot of homes that are in need of repairs, and properties in need of repairs. And we, as the city of Albany and our community development agency right now, if you're a landlord and you're coming in to us asking for help repairing your home and you're willing to make sure that rents are affordable moving forward, there's a waiting list, for you. We don't have enough funding to provide all that need, and we get that funding from the state and federal levels. We could use the increase in funding from the state and federal governments towards home repairs and towards property repairs and property maintenance. And I know the land banks across the state, not just the one here in Albany, could use further help in turning around those vacant properties too. the math on those is even more difficult. And those buildings require even more subsidy. That's housing that's locked away simply because there isn't enough money to be spent on them at the local level. So we could absolutely use all support from the state and federal level that we can get towards home repairs.
Yeah, what we touched on, non-traditional funding for those houses to get people in them. The more a house sits vacant, it will snowball to other effects around the neighborhood. It invites crime, it invites squatters, property values around it will go down. So I think looking at how to best keep people in their homes that want to be in their homes, and sometimes it's a small fix. So I think, looking at it as a preventive measure is the way to go. And how can we bridge that gap between a homeowner who needs help and the services that are out there? And how do we get the word out that there is some help available, and also increase that help?
Yeah, some of the folks, we might have seen in the news, some folks at the county level sort of like to play some politics with the cost of rehab, but the costs are just that high at the moment. Every land bank and Habitat for Humanity rehab or new construction, the gap between what it costs to build that unit or to rehab that unit versus what it sells is about $100,000 in neighborhoods like South End, Arbor Hill, and West Hill. We need more funding to close those gaps and to provide safe and secure and affordable housing for people.
Mhm. And unfortunately, a lot of developers are not looking at those neighborhoods to develop. It's just not cost effective to be able to do that.
It is the cost-effective nature of the project, the sole reason why developers are choosing not to develop in those neighborhoods.
A lot of it, and also, if you have a neighborhood, and we've talked about generationally, crime, poverty, different things. It's like those neighborhoods, unfortunately, are not always attractive for new development. It's just sort of the way it is. Or, one of the things we talked about right before the pandemic was how do we do infill when you have a row of houses where you have a couple of the teeth missing? It is so expensive to put a new row house in between the other ones that it just is not. We brought a bunch of developers together at a table. Sam, you were there. It was a vacant building meeting right before the pandemic. And we said, okay, how can we make this easier to start putting houses back in these holes? And we brought developers in who said, and they listed all the reasons why they just can't do it. And because they can't turn around and sell that, they can't rent it for enough to get their money back. So some of these issues are bigger than we can solve here today, but a lot of it unfortunately comes down to money.
Yeah, there are tax credit programs and some other grant programs out there to help massage the numbers, but a lot of them are still really tough. There's only so much you can massage in some of those budgets to make the math work.
And the bottom line is developers are in business to make money. That's why they do it. I mean, there is an altruistic side, but also it's a business, and they have to turn a profit. Otherwise they can't do it anymore.
Yeah, what is unique and interesting that we've been seeing is land banks and local governments, getting clusters of properties together. It takes time through the tax foreclosure process. It takes time to do that, but getting those clusters together, helping overcome those cost differences through economies of scale, right? It's much harder to do it with one property as opposed to like 5 or 6 or 7. And when you have larger swaths like that, the numbers are easier to massage out a little bit. And so that's one solution we've seen, on the local level that the Albany Land Bank has been doing. They're also testing out ways. Right now, they're building a small home on Sheridan Avenue in Albany, right between Lexington and Henry Johnson, with the help of a local philanthropist to try to see what the gap is on a smaller home like that. So there's a lot of experimentation, innovation going on. Trying to solve for that question, but ultimately a lot of it is the math and the financing.
And on that note, I would like to thank you all so very much. This is a topic that we could definitely continue to go on and on about, and it may be a part two to this conversation. But I appreciate you all providing a good picture of the housing stock market in the city, challenges, as well as solutions and innovative approaches that are currently being explored. With that, I say thank you. And this concludes another segment of the 30-minute download community audit report. Thank you.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you.